You're sitting in the stands. It's noon, Rome, sometime around 60 AD. The sun is directly overhead, which means there is no shade anywhere, and the stone bench underneath you has been absorbing heat since sunrise. Somebody 2 rows down is eating something. Half the crowd has wandered off to find lunch because this part of the day is the boring part, the interval, the bit before the good fights start in the afternoon. Down on the sand, the Roman state is killing people. So what did Rome actually do to people who broke the law? The answer is stranger than the cruelty, because Rome, for roughly 1,000 years, had almost no prisons, almost none. Let's start where you'd expect. In 450 BC, Rome did something genuinely radical for its moment. It wrote the law down. 12 tablets, displayed publicly in the Forum, where any citizen could go and read exactly what the rules were and exactly what happened if you broke them. This mattered enormously. Before written law, the rules lived inside the heads of aristocratic priests who also happened to be the judges, which is a system with certain obvious features. Writing it down took the law out of their mouths and put it on a wall. And when you read the 12 tables, it looks familiar. There are procedures, there are property disputes, there are penalties scaled to offenses. It looks, from a distance, like a legal system doing what you assume a legal system does. A crime is committed, a punishment is assigned, the wrongdoer is corrected or removed, and the community moves on. Except that's not what Roman punishment was doing, not even slightly. Here is the thing that historians of Roman law keep circling back to, and it takes a second to feel how strange it is. Rome did not imprison people as a punishment. The prison existed. Beneath the Capitoline Hill, there was a structure called the Tullium, later known as the Mamertine, and it is exactly as grim as you're imagining. A stone chamber entered through a hole in the floor above it. But it was not a sentence, it was a waiting room. Prisoners were held there for days, occasionally weeks, while the state decided what to do with them, and then the state did it. Roman law understood custody as holding. It did not understand custody as the punishment itself. Sit with what that means practically. If you cannot sentence a person to 20 years, then every single punishment available to you has to happen to a body, in the open, on a schedule the public can attend. There is no offstage. There is no facility on the edge of town where the thing quietly occurs and nobody has to think about it. Roman punishment happened where people were. Fines, exile, loss of citizenship, which stripped a man of legal personhood and left him standing in the street as something the law no longer recognized. Beatings, enslavement, and at the end of the scale, execution, in forms that Rome designed with a level of imagination that should tell you something was going on beyond justice. Which brings us to the strangest sentence in Roman law. We'll get to it, because it involves a sack. But here's where it gets strange. The sack is called the poena culi, the punishment of the sack. It was reserved for parricide, the murder of your own father, which Roman culture regarded not as a crime, but as a kind of hole torn in the order of the universe. The condemned was sewn into a large leather sack and thrown into water. That's the early version. The later sources add company: a dog, a rooster, a snake, an ape, 4 animals sewn into the sack alongside the man, and all of it thrown into the Tiber or the sea. Nobody is entirely sure what the animals meant. Scholars have argued about it for centuries. Then there is damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, a sentence carried out at midday in the arena in front of whoever happened to still be sitting there. And crucifixion, which almost everybody misunderstands because we've inherited it as a religious image rather than a legal instrument. Crucifixion was, with rare exceptions, not for citizens. It was for slaves, for rebels, for people the empire had decided were not fully people. In 71 BC, after the slave revolt led by Spartacus was crushed, ancient sources report that 6,000 of the survivors were crucified along the Appian Way, spaced out over the 130 miles of road between Capua and Rome. Not in an arena, not in a square, along a highway where the traffic was. Look at these punishments together and stop thinking about pain for a second. Look at the design. A sack, a costume of animals, a scheduled midday slot in a stadium, crosses arranged along a road at intervals like mile markers. These aren't punishments, these are productions. They have props, they have a venue, they have a running time. Let that sink in. Now I have to slow down, because if you're skeptical, you should be, and I'd rather hand you the objection than have you find it yourself. Much of what we just covered is shakier than it sounds. The animals in the sack, the dog, the rooster, the snake, the ape, appear in sources written centuries after the practice supposedly began. Earlier accounts mention the sack and the water and nothing else. That menagerie may be several hundred years of accumulated embellishment, each writer adding a creature. The 6,000 crosses come from a historian working generations after the event, and Roman writers used enormous numbers the way we use the word thousands, as rhetoric. And the Romans who wrote most vividly about Roman punishment were frequently doing politics. Describing an emperor's excesses was a way of describing an emperor. So some of what we know about Roman punishment is Roman propaganda about Roman punishment, which, it turns out, is the single most revealing fact in this entire story. Because if a civilization exaggerates anything, it exaggerates the thing it wants you looking at. By the 2nd century AD, Roman law had done something it had never bothered to write down before. It formally divided the population in two, the honestiores and the humiliores, the honorable and the lowly. Senators, knights, soldiers, town councilors on one side, everybody else on the other. Same crime, different punishment. An honestiores convicted of a capital offense might face exile or the confiscation of his property or a beheading conducted quickly and away from a crowd. A humilior convicted of the identical offense faced the cross or the beasts or the mines, which was simply a slower execution with productivity attached. The law was not asking what you had done, it had already asked that. The law was asking who you were, and then it was selecting your audience. Which brings us to a Roman who noticed. Around the same period, the philosopher Seneca wrote a letter to a friend describing a visit to the arena. He'd stopped by at noon expecting something light, a bit of comedy between the morning and afternoon programs. Instead, he found the noon executions, and what disturbed him was not primarily the condemned, it was the crowd, bored between deaths, calling out for the next one, complaining about the pacing. Seneca left, and the warning he wrote down was not about what Rome was doing to the condemned, it was about what watching was doing to the watchers. He said he came home more cruel, less human, because he had been among humans. Let that sink in. So here is what Roman punishment actually was. It was not correction. Nobody was correcting the man in the sack. It was not deterrence, not really, because Rome kept scaling the horror upward and the crimes kept happening. It was a broadcast. Its function was never to change the condemned. The condemned was already finished. Its function was to change the crowd, to rehearse in public, on a schedule, in front of as many eyes as could be gathered, the single most important fact the empire ever needed its citizens to know. Who was a person, who was a body, and who got to decide. A slave and a senator could commit precisely the same act on precisely the same afternoon. One paid money, one was fed to something at noon while people ate lunch. The cruelty was not a malfunction of the Roman system. The cruelty was the Roman system running exactly as designed, and running well. So what was punishment like in ancient Rome? The honest answer is that we don't fully know, and the reason we don't is itself the answer. Almost everything we have was written by the people who were never going to receive it. The record of Roman punishment is a view from the good seats, which is where this video put you at the very beginning. Notice that. You weren't asked to imagine being sewn into a sack. You weren't asked to imagine the sand. You were given a bench and shade you didn't have and a crowd around you, and you took the seat without noticing, because that's the seat we always take. Rome fell. The arena closed. Nobody sits on that stone bench anymore. The crowd never went home. Roman punishment was public because a punishment nobody sees doesn't do its job. Is that still true today? Tell me what you think in the comments.